Today, we welcome to the podcast Roger Kemp of RK Media, a great friend and a great guy. Happy to have you, Roger.
Great to be with you, Todd.
All right, Roger, people today know you as the leader of RK Media and as somebody who spent more than 4 decades in Christian media. But before we talk about any of that, take us back to the beginning. What was life like for you, the young Roger Kemp?
Well, uh, I am the fifth of seven children. My parents were having kids over the span of 18 years. My oldest brother, my youngest brother have an 18-year spread between them. I was the fifth, and three girls and four boys, and we had somewhat of an idyllic upbringing. My parents started their family in Wheaton, Illinois, and the bastion of evangelical Christianity, at least up to a certain period of time. And so we have roots in Chicago. But in 1960, my dad was transferred to Southern California, and I was 3 years old at the time. And yeah, we had this little house, 1,800 square feet, seven kids, two parents, a dog, and life was good. We didn't have. My dad was a blue collar worker, and just parents, grew up during World War II, and my dad served in the Navy. So you can kind of guess the ilk, but my parents loved having kids. My mom was an only child, and she was just set out to have a lot of kids, and boy, they did. So wonderful, wonderful upbringing. Great siblings. We still all get along today, and good start.
Well, it's so much more like mine. My dad was in the Navy, and I tell people all the time I grew up in a bubble. Like I never saw my parents fight. Same kind of ideas. It's a grew up in a perfect world. Did you grow up in the church? Were you a church kid from day one, or was the
Yeah, my
family
my
weird?
parents had a conversion experience when they were in Wheaton. When my dad came home from the war, they actually been married about 5 years, and they both grew up in the church and sort of walked away from that. But 5 years into their marriage, they had a conversion experience and really got serious about their faith and never looked back on that. And so, yes, I was raised at Fullerton Evangelical Free Church in Southern California. That's where I grew up and had a great experience there.
Wow. So, tell me your story. I'm assuming it's like mine. I tell people sometimes I envy people who live this crazy wild life in the dark. They find Jesus and everything changes. But when you grow up in the church, I feel like it's sometimes tough to say when you really realize, oh, I get it. Like you've been told it, you can recite verses, you go to vacation Bible school, but at some point there's got to be this thing of like, oh, I get what you're talking about. Oh, okay, that's what faith looks like. Did you have that moment, and what did it look like?
We all have seasons in our faith, right? Especially for those of us who have decades of experience in the faith. And my coming to Jesus actually happened at a summer camp in 1966 when I was at Hume Lake Christian Conference Center wagon train camp with my brother, and I still have the group photo that we took back then. A lot of shenanigans that week, but I had a real genuine Friday night at the fireside come to Jesus moment. It was very real. It was well led by the leadership, and growing up in a Christian home, that was I would say somewhat unusual because it was a moment where I realized my faith had to be mine.
Mhm.
But getting back to the seasons part, you test that along the way, especially as a young person. And I had some milestones through high school and college. Times of doubt and times of decision and really times of saying no, I'm all in on this. And
Mhm.
but I do over the course of my life, I really had a sense that God had called me out um, to serve Him. And now that I look back and like I said, I'm going to be 70 next year, so I do a lot of looking back. But when I look back, I can see the thread of His hand on my life, and really feeling like he called me to do what I'm doing now. And, I often tell people that when I was young, I wanted to serve God in the worst possible way. And I do believe that I have found the worst possible way. Yeah, little rim shot there. But
Yeah.
no, there's a real sense that, because I've been doing the same thing for so long that
Mm,
no, God really had his hand on me
yeah.
and orchestrated things to be where I am today.
Well, so I'll make you go back here. So you graduate your camp experience, obviously, where you were below 18. I mean, it's not like you sign up for a life of ministry, maybe, a life on mission, but you go to college, are you thinking career? Or you like, where were you headed? And how did your ministry and your vocation collide?
My story would be incomplete if I didn't talk about 1973, and I hope I don't bore people with this. But 1973, you think back, great pressure on the economy. I was a sophomore in high school and getting ready to go in my junior year. If you remember high school, junior year, that's a big deal. That's where everything comes together. I was on the football
Mhm.
team and in some leadership positions, active at church, active at high school in Southern California. And my dad's world fell apart on the business side, and he was let go. His company downsized, and he was without a job. And it was also at a time with the 7 kids, we're like the 12 tribes of Judah. We were all spread out. I
Mhm.
had older brothers going to college and my sister in nursing school, and my brother did a overseas trip when he graduated from high school, and we all kind of scattered in 1973. My dad took a job not in Southern California, but in Boston, of all places.
Huh.
And that was a schizophrenic experience for me because I was a beach boy from Southern California that got displaced when I was 16 years old, went back to Boston for 2 years. And that really shaped my character in ways that are profound today because God used that. We went from a household of 7 kids to a household of 3 kids. It was me and my younger brother, younger sister. And my dad was struggling with his job. It was not a happy experience for him. And of course, my mom got displaced too. So everything got upset.
Yeah.
But God used that to forge my personality and do some things in my spiritual life. I decided to go to Moody Bible Institute when I graduated from high school in Boston. And that too was a decision that was framed out of a history that our family had with Moody, but also decided, I don't really know what I want to do with my career. I certainly don't want to do what my dad did because that was hard. and, and I'm watching him go through this painful time in his life. I think I'll go study the Bible for a couple of years because I know that won't hurt me, and I'll figure it out there. And that's pretty much exactly what happened. I had 3 years at Moody. It was a 3-year college at the time, not a 4-year. I took a Bible theology major, studied the Bible, and for a kid who went to church all his life, I was a little embarrassed by how much I learned at Moody Bible Institute because I missed a lot growing up. And anyway, I learned a lot about the Bible, and that definitely I look back with tremendous fondness towards that downtown urban experience in Chicago, going to Moody and learning what I learned, and then seeing city life and changing my worldview. God used that as another formative period in my life.
So you knew you didn't want to be a pastor necessarily, but you did want to study the Bible and then see where it took you.
Yeah, and what happened, Todd, is I'd had enough of the Chicago life. I really wanted to come back to California when I was finished at Moody, and that was more a weather thing and a family thing. The family began to regather in
Mm.
Southern California. So I moved back there, and part of my story is that I fell in love with a young gal my freshman year at Moody, and when we both graduated from Moody, we weren't quite ready to get married, but we knew we had this relationship that we wanted to continue to cultivate. She moved out to California, moved in with a girlfriend. I moved out to California, and an old buddy of mine from Fullerton, we shared an apartment. And within a year, Lori and I decided to let's get serious about this. Let's get married. And so, in 1979, we got married. Um, in that same period, I ran into friends from our church. Again, our family was rooted at Fullerton Free Church. Chuck Swindoll had just become the pastor there in 1971, and our families formed a friendship. Al Sanders owned this little agency in Southern California, and he had just helped Chuck launch a radio program. And everything converged at that moment. I ran into the Sanders family and was invited to join the staff at Ambassador Advertising Agency, which was the organization that launched Insight for a Living and later worked with Jim Dobson and John MacArthur and all of the mainstay radio programs back in the 70s and 80s. And I found myself working in the shipping department in 1979, same year I got married, which is now over, well over 46, 47 years ago. And I got a front row seat to Christian radio and Bible teaching on radio as we know it today. And little did I know I'd be doing that very same thing for decades later.
I don't know if I've ever asked you this. What did you do when you moved back to California for that year before you got this job? Were you tried for a
I fl-
career or just taking a job?
Man, I floundered. I
Okay.
don't tell many people this, but I sold it wasn't Cutco knives. It was like that though. Who was a who was a brush salesman at the door to door Fuller Brush Company.
Yeah. Yeah.
I did that
Wow.
for about a week. I worked
No.
I worked the front desk at a hotel. I
Yeah.
was floundering. I was trying to find what I needed to do, and of course I was finishing up my degree, which I had to do when I finished at Moody. I wanted to get a full-fledged degree, so I went to Cal State Fullerton and finished there in communications.
Okay.
And
So
so
communications
Bible
is what you're
theology and communications, it's really what I'm doing today.
I was gonna say it couldn't have been better. It's so funny, Roger. I didn't know this till we started talking. You and I have such a similar path. My dad too lost his job right at the end of my high school, beginning of college career. My world was turned upside down, and I had my season, and I worked at an art museum and a bookstore during until I found what I was going to go do. Like I find so many similarities I had no idea we both had. Okay, so your front row seat, you have a degree and you're working in a shipping department. I'm assuming it was the Wild West because that was sort of I guess, a very new industry. They're building this business model while you're in the door. What gets you out of the shipping department and into whatever else department? What was the journey like in that organization?
Well, two words, Al Sanders.
Yeah.
He and I were sort of cut out of the same cloth. Al Sanders is a pioneer in Christian radio. He's gone now. Beautiful man, very creative on steroids. Nobody like him. Had a
Mm,
beautiful voice. Um, but he saw something in me and trusted me to start. Those are the days where we delivered our radio programs on reel to reel tape. It was very tangible. And
mhm.
my job in the shipping department was duplicating tapes and sending them to radio stations. And he said, "Hey, I need you to edit some sermons for Chuck." And Chuck was my pastor, and I was all too happy to learn how to do that. So Al taught me how to do that. He later taught me how to write, and those two skills. I came up through the creative ranks in Christian radio. Had a couple of different roles, but I always loved writing, editing, producing. Content was my thing. And anyway, so Al is the one who allowed me to do that. It was a privilege to learn from him.
And I mean, as long as I've known you now, you're a great writer, but you're also it's your passion. You love writing. I think you'd probably rather be called a writer than anything else
True.
if that's true. Okay. So did you I mean, I think everybody has to learn and you exercise that muscle and you get better. But do you look back at that time and think, man, I really had something that was easy to build upon? Or was it a struggle or was it exciting for you? Like, how did that writing journey go from that job even to where you are now?
Well, I wish I had it with me to show you. I wish I'd thought of it. Al Sanders, back in the day, we literally used typewriters to write the scripts. I mean, I hate to admit that. And he would correct them with a blue pen. He didn't use red because that would be too offensive. But he'd get my scripts and then he would correct them with a blue pen. And I have the first script that I ever
That you
wrote for him. I
enjoyed?
still have it, and there's more blue than ink on the page. I'll tell you that. It's pretty funny. Um,
Was he good? Like, was he a really good writer or some people are good
yeah,
writers,
he
some
had, in the kind of writing we do, Todd, as you know, is for the ear. It's not for the eye. Nobody sees what we write; they hear it. And so there's an art form to writing for what's heard. And I've always liked that because when you think about it, back in the Old Testament days, guys didn't walk around with a Bible tucked under their arm.
Mhm.
Those who had printed copies, extremely rare. And you remember, of course, the story of, Ezra, Nehemiah, and reading the scriptures and people literally crying when they heard the scripture. That's the way they consumed the scriptures. They heard it.
That's right.
It was an audio experience. And in a lot of ways, that's what radio is and podcasting is today is an audio experience. But anyway, he taught me the craft of doing things for the ear, which is fun because you break all the grammatical uh, structure
Right.
because we talk a lot differently than we write or read. And he taught me that craft, and it took a while, but I think the thing was I loved it, and I had a passion for it. And there may be people watching us talk going, I have no idea who this guy is. He says he's in radio doing it forever. And I sort of like it that way. Our company today produces and distributes many names that our audience would recognize, but they don't know me. And I kind of like that because I'm rarely on the microphone. I often say I'm usually right next to the guy or the gal who is.
Mhm.
And that's because I'm a support to that person. Um, But anyway, a lot of that is done with the crafting and the writing and preparing announcer materials, and it's just a large volume of writing. And I still, to this day, just love that particular part of the craft.
Yeah, that's I don't wanna go too far down the weeds on it, but you really got me thinking, you're 100% right. There's a difference between reading where you can stop and ponder and then audible where you want somebody to remember something or think deeply, but you're also on a time crunch, meaning you can't take someone on too big of a journey because 'cause you've got a time limit. So you've gotta really be efficient with your words, but not so efficient it's poetry. You need them to get what you're trying to say, and it's gotta be an art form you've developed over the
Yeah,
years. I
you
never
you kind
pondered
of
it.
talking sound bites.
Yeah,
You
interesting.
got to start and finish real quick.
Yeah, this is interesting. And then, of course, now you've grown into print, and the world's changed since you came in, but you started with the radio, you're still there, and you've added on all the other mediums that have shown up in the last, 4 decades.
Well, it's so exciting that we live in an exciting day. People ask me all the time, is radio dying? And yeah, certainly is changing, but it's not dying.
Right.
It's changing a lot, and all these new opportunities are just more open doors to. We're content creators,
Mhm.
and it's always been about good content, solid content, credible content, and so all these digital opportunities. You using this one, Todd, is a great example. Look what we get to do. Two guys in two different places
Right.
talking like this over a video screen and recording something that who knows how God will use it, but it's an exciting day.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. All right, I have a lot of nuanced questions, but let's put them on the shelf. Keep going. Why did you end that relationship, and how long were you there, and what opportunity revealed itself for you?
I was ambitious. I wanted to learn everything I possibly could, and so I was with Al Sanders for about 11 years, and at during that time, they had, a number of, high volume broadcasts that were being produced on-site in, Fullerton and distributed over their network, throughout the United States, and, it was a super exciting time to be a part of that and work on various accounts. And Al Sanders had any one of us producers who are actually producing programs, we'd be assigned like 4 different programs that we would be responsible for. The volume was mind numbing of what we were working on, but fun. And at one point, finally, Chuck and Cynthia Swindoll, who were being produced there at Ambassador Advertising, asked me to be their vice president of broadcasting and international ministries. That was in 1991. So I'd been with Al for 11 years and moved over to be a leader at Inside for Living. And I was there for 7 or 8 years, I think. And oh boy, was that a ride. That was fun too.
Okay, I gotta ask you this question. Did they interact with you a lot in your role, and that's how they learned to like and trust you, or do they already know you through church, or was it a combination of both? How did that phone call happen?
I had a lot of interaction with Chuck and Cynthia as a producer on the radio program. I was writing the copy for the announcer, the beginning and the close of the show. I was editing the sermons, and I used to tell Chuck, "I've heard more of your voice than you've heard of your voice," and joke around with him, and we had a great relationship. And yeah, that I think it was fluid that way, and they had a need in that particular leadership, and I was eager to try something new. And I was 33 at the time, and it was my big chance to do something uh, in a leadership role. And boy, did I learn a lot during that season. It was a beautiful time at Inside for Living.
Uh, and you never had to move, right? You got to stay in your same house or
Right,
same situation, right? So it was
right.
a move up without too much of pulling roots out of your life. So how long were you in that? And were you in the same position the whole time, or did that create a journey within that organization as well?
Yeah, I had responsibility to oversee all of the production of the daily radio program and its distribution. So essentially, I was taking on the role that Ambassador was doing from a position at Inside for a Living. Plus, they asked me to oversee the international ministry. And I can't believe when I look back, I traveled all over the world during those 7 or 8 years. Got my first passport and traveled to their international offices, and we worked on translated languages of the program, got to see the world. And during that season, I got bit by the bug of global missions. And
Mm,
once you see God at work beyond the borders of the United States, it gets in your bloodstream and never leaves you. So my
wow.
heart has always been since for what God is doing around the world. As an American young person, just my mind was blown and my eyes were open to what God is doing in countries where what we have is so rare in the United States, uh, choking on our own abundance, if you will, as it relates to the access to great Bible teaching and Christian radio. It's rare in other countries, and people just clamor for it.
Mm.
And that sense of purity for seeking after God in other countries was really fun to watch and be a part of.
All right, so I'm gonna ask you a question that probably is better for the end, but I'm gonna hit you with it right here. What had I had this conversation with someone yesterday, so this is fresh on my mind, and I said the same thing. Once your eyes get open to a world that's outside the American Christian culture, you can't go back. And so my question to you is, did that spur any career ambitions or career changes, or did that just put a love in your heart and you you do that on your own on the side now through missions or giving or whatever, or have you kept that desire for international work or whatever that word would be in your life since then, or your professional life, I guess?
I would put it this way, Todd, that let's go back to we haven't talked a lot about the content of the programs that we're producing. A lot of it's Bible teaching, family issues programs. We work with Voice of the Martyrs, a persecuted church. Um, but when God's word is powerful, the programs that we're putting together are not entertainment. Um, they often say the difference between Christian television and Christian radio. I hope I don't offend anybody here, but Christian television, by virtue of the fact that you're seeing Bible teachers, tends towards entertainment.
Mm,
The audio side, radio, podcasting version of Bible teaching is discipleship. Now, if you export that into other countries and you have the experience that I did and seeing how people would clamor for that, they would gather in some countries, third world countries, they would gather around a speaker and listen together in groups to
mhm.
Bible teachings in their own language because they'd never heard it before. It's just a vivid illustration for how powerful God's word actually is when the Spirit of God uses that moment to illuminate uh, himself inside a person through his word. And that's happening in the US too. It's just not as obvious.
That's right.
And so I think a lot what happened even when you translated these languages, even when you translated these messages from a Texas preacher with an accent from America and you translate it into Hindi, Spanish, Mandarin, all these different countries, it still worked. Not because Chuck was brilliant, it's
No.
because God's word is powerful. And I think that really sort of it really got a hold of my heart. This is something different that I'm a part of, and it's really exciting to to commit my life to it.
For the people who are not in the radio industry, I'm making a guess here, it's a fairly educated guess, but I don't think people realize that the radio industry was more than just putting a sermon on the radio, which once again, there was a time where preachers went to a radio station, they taught, but they preached in their church. And the new phenomenon was let's record you in the church. But it wasn't just for the airways, because what was happening is people were like you were producing cassette tapes and people were listening to them over and over and sharing it. So cassette tapes were going around the world and radio ministries had a big play into that. And it wasn't radio, it was just taking media and delivering it everywhere. Do you have any stories? Am I right about that? Cassette tapes were sort of the thing at the time?
Oh yeah, and a lot of people still have them as collector's items, that's for sure. Imagine what that would be like when you're isolated in a third world country and you have no access to anything and somebody gives you this thing that you could play. It's like a friend.
Yeah,
And uh radio and audio, I'm wearing an earbud right now. Um and our listeners in radio often do. And podcasting, they certainly do. It's an intimate experience.
yeah,
Going to church, we do in groups. Going to movies, we do in a group. We watch television as a family at home together on the sofa. Radio and the audio experience, especially podcasting, is a one off. It's one person at a time. It's a very intimate thing. People go into a space and they put if once the earbuds go in, it's me and you,
yeah,
and they drop their guard spiritually thinking. They're not aware of people around judging them about what they are or are not listening to. It might happen in a car as a companion. So all of the things drop and people have this experience where they're willing to hear something different. Um, it's not true that Christian radio is consumed by only Christians.
yeah,
It may feel like it,
right,
but the statistics prove that there are a lot of people who are willing to test and listen. They would never shadow the door of a church, but they're alone in their car and they come across a Christian radio station. They hear this winsome guy talking about life. And so anyway, and their ears and eyes and hearts are open to hear the gospel. And a lot of people describe their spiritual pilgrimage as starting right there at that moment.
There's so many great stories of people who were in a predicament and they turned on the radio looking for anything, and it was they heard the right thing at the right time. So there's so many stories of God using
Yeah.
like you said, the teaching, and getting His word out because it is powerful. There's a story, and if you don't know it, pretend I'm telling you for the first time. I may be stealing it from you, but I think it was Chuck Swindoll. It might have been Carlos, his Spanish pastor at the time, but they were down in South America and they were getting in a cab and their voice was on the radio. The guy was listening and he started Chuck, I think it may have been Chuck, started talking in the back seat. The guy told him to hush. He's like, hush, I'm listening to this important guy. And
Yeah.
Chuck just let him have it. Like, okay, well, if that's what you want to do, but I can talk to you right now live if you want. But it was that intimate to your point. Is that a real story? 'Cause I remember hearing that before.
It is, and I can tell you I've had a similar experience when I'm in Uber cars. I travel a lot, and I'm always, intrigued to see how Uber drivers who have the most boring job in the world, God bless them for taking care of us, um, but they're often, alone a lot, so they're on the dashboard punching through stations or Spotify or something, but I've often, find them listening to something, and it's an open door for me to say, "Hey, I've got a couple of shows on that radio station." What? That's
Right.
been fun.
Right. And then okay, so you're at Insight for Living. You have an international hat on. Your mind is growing. Your passion's growing deep. You know Chuck. He's your pastor and your boss, I guess, right? Um, and you said 8 years. What was changed? Is that ambition bug still in your brain? Why? What happened there?
Well, I got recruited, and, back in 1998, the summer of '98, Salem Communications in Camarillo, California, the largest network of, Christian Bible teaching, programs in the country, sought me out to be the national program director. And again, I saw that as an opportunity. I remember the morning that I sat down with Chuck to tell him what I was doing. We were doing an event in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I asked him to have breakfast and asked him for his blessing on something that I wanted to do. And Chuck, he's the kind of guy that once you tell him that God has called you to something different, he would say so quickly, "Well, who am I to stand in the way of what God's told you to do?" I was careful how I played that because I
Right.
care so much about my relationship with him. But this is another step for me to be the channel captain for about 50 um, large AM and FM stations who are carrying Bible teaching programs in the U.S. Decided to do that. And a year after that happened, they went public, which was not exactly my passion to take anything public because I'm finances never been a real big deal to me. But nonetheless, it was a hair on fire experience, a corporate experience. That season of about 6 years was just very intense of learning how to do the craft that I was doing in a commercial environment
Mhm.
and built a lot of relationships then and had a lot of responsibility, got to do a lot of cool stuff. I continue to work with all the major Christian ministries who are using Salem Communications to air their programs. Kind of switched sides of the table, Todd, if you will.
Yeah.
Was on the other side for a while. And then I just a fast track after about 6 years of that, I went to the owner, Ed Atsinger is his name. Wonderful, another wonderful man. And as you know, Todd, these three men I've named in this conversation have all had a huge influence on my life,
Right.
including Ed Atsinger. Um, I asked for his blessing to start an agency who would then become a customer of Salem. I wanted to come alongside, my passion was to come alongside nonprofit ministries and help them figure out how to effectively do this thing of creating and finding people to listen to their their programs, which I've been doing now for 22 years in this role. So it's hard to imagine because during that time I met you. We
Yep.
hit it off right away. I forget the year, but it was had to be in the early 2000s, I think.
Yep. But 2006, I think it was. Yeah, it's so interesting because yeah, you've been a mentor, and I've sort of followed you. I called you when I needed to call Chuck and tell him I was leaving, and he told me the same sentence. He says, "We've learned in our life if somebody is confident God's told them to do something, he's like, who am I? I'm not even gonna sit here and argue with you. If you're, I know you prayed about it, if you have peace." And so yeah, he's like that. Well, was Ed good like that as well? Was it? I mean, obviously, when you a man of your caliber leaves, people are disappointed. But was he encouraging to you? Did he tell you go get him? Help? I
Well,
mean, if I
I
help.
when I met with Ed, it was a difficult conversation because I did well there, we had a good relationship. I reported directly to him. Ed is a little intense,
Yeah,
and
yes.
and uh, and so, but I had the epiphany that the way I wanted to start the conversation with him was, Ed, I when I am done having this conversation with you and I walk out that door pointed behind me, what I want from you is your blessing. I want to tell you something I want to do, and I really want to do this with your favor,
Uh,
and not any other way. And he, I think that helped him, know what I was going to put him through. And so he gave me that, and we continue to be good friends. He's in his deep in his 80s now. Wonderful guy. I learned a lot from him, though. I learned to spar in the arena of good ideas with men and women who are willing to, duke it out with ideas, not personally, but
mhm.
it was pretty intense. I developed thick skin during that time, and I've told him since that I don't think there would be an RK Media, which is the name of our agency. Not a
Mhm.
real clever name, but initials are my name.
For a writer,
But
you didn't go
yeah,
off
yeah,
far.
I never came up with anything better. But I told him that I don't think there would be an organization like that if it weren't for him, and actually for all three men that I've named,
Yeah,
because they all taught me something that I carried into my next frontier that I have valued. And he taught me, you know, how to do business at a very high level and to do it with integrity and with courage. He
yeah,
built a huge network of radio stations at a lot of risk,
yeah.
and he did it well.
Would you, and I don't want to put you on the spot, don't, if something's not here, you don't have to make it up, but with Chuck and being a pastor, I mean, there's one thing about running a ministry, and there's still a pastor's heart. Like, did you learn things from Inside Living that still
Oh
trickle down
man.
to other
Well,
ministries
first
now?
of all, I would want to tell people like you would that Chuck is one of the most hilarious guys in the world, and he's so fun to be around.
Yeah,
And so on the personal side, just to loosen up a little, don't take yourself so seriously, Roger. Be
yeah,
yourself. Don't try to impress anyone. Um, there's all that and just the fun of being around him. But I think also doing things with excellence. He's a writer too. I learned a lot about communications from him. But my relationship with him, I would describe as a little bit complicated because he started out as my pastor.
mhm,
I mean, he officiated my grandfather's funeral. It's the earliest memory I have of him in 1973, um, and married my brother and his wife and my sister and her husband, and and my sister babysat the Swindoll children, and so we go way back that way. But also a pastor, he's a really good friend, shepherded me through
mhm,
a lot of difficult times in my life. I would also say, it's important. I was thinking about what I might say about Chuck and Ed and Al. They all
mhm,
had flaws, like me.
right,
And I bring that up because Al's gone now. And when we talk of those who are gone, we tend to, as Chuck would say, we tend to deify the deceased sometimes, make them more than,
right,
perfect.
right,
Um, Al was flawed, but, he was God's greatest gift to me during that season of my life, just a wonderful guy. I only say that because I want people listening to this podcast not to just be listening to 2 guys reminisce about their careers and stuff. I fear that being boring. Maybe see the thread of your own stories you're listening today,
Yeah,
and, even some hopefulness and maybe what God's calling you to do. But also, but to know that greatness comes, and all 3 of these men, great men, and through our flaws and
right,
through our weaknesses, and, not scandal. I'm not talking about
yeah,
scandal,
right,
talking about humanity,
yeah. I
and,
I feel that I feel that way, especially with Insight for Living. You walk away and you say, "I'm gonna take all the great things, and I'm gonna take things that aren't great. I'm gonna walk away, and I'll know what to do and what not to do," right? They're both there. Um, with you as a writer, and I'm not gonna say it, Chuck is a world-class orator. I still say if he wasn't a pastor, he would have been a Mark Twain, or he could read the phone book and you would listen. He just
yeah,
has that thing.
yeah,
And he's one of the rare people, I believe, that can write like he speaks. Some people write like they write, and they speak like they speak, and his
exactly,
you can read him and hear him speak in his
right.
word. So I guess my question to you is, as a writer, by you go elbow to elbow with all these greats, and he's just one of them, but he is a world-class writer like that. Like, do you learn from them? Are you too busy doing your job, or do you get to say, "Wow, I appreciate what they did." I mean, I'm assuming you've stole a lot of your craft by watching really great men do theirs.
Absolutely learn from them.
Yeah.
Absolutely have. You can't be around it that much and consume it that much without it impacting you. Writing is a gift. Yes, it's learned, it's refined, but I do think that God instills it in some and not in others. Um, it's a little weird to wake up in the morning and not be able to wait till you can do some writing. I mean, that's a little weird. You do that in isolation, and so it's a craft like many other crafts. But so I do think that something's instilled, but it can be refined for sure. And you can't, I've basically been doing it for every day, writing every day for the last 40 years. You ought to be able to get fairly good at it. Um, but at the end of the day, you got to have something to say.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
so, that's the other thing. So a lot of my writing is sometimes, written for somebody else. It's written for an announcer, or it's, written for somebody else to say. So you're sort of channeling, prepping material. Make
Yeah.
no mistake, Chuck says what he wants to say. He can do his own writing and speaking, but in radio, words are all we have. So there's a lot of writing, that prep material that goes into getting people ready.
I asked you this question when I was at your house, I guess it was last year, but you've written for so many people for so long, and I think I asked you, what is your voice? Do you have your voice? Do you do your own writing on the side? And so give everybody else the answers you gave me, because I remember thinking, with all that skill coming out of you, I can't imagine you don't have an amazing diary, or thoughts, or devotions, or whatever it is, or children's books in your closet, or whatever. But what do you do with that who's Roger, and where does his brain go when he's not
Well, I
on?
do I do have, decades of journals, leather-bound journals. I early on, it's another craft that Chuck has engaged in all his life. That Remember, he used to give out blank journals to remember that?
Right?
I've got a couple of those blank journals that I've filled, already, and in my study, I've got, a row of, uh, journals that nobody's ever gonna wanna read. But my voice is hidden somewhere in there.
Yeah.
I, I do believe I have my own voice. As you know, my wife, Lori, 2 years ago was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 4 now.
Mhm.
She's doing well. Uh, but during that time, part of my therapy was writing about that experience and telling her story to our friends and colleagues. And that's one manifestation of my voice. And God used that during the 2 years to sort of help me understand how to how to express pain
Mhm.
and suffering. She was suffering physically. I was suffering emotionally. We still have a journey to go. And
Right.
writing is often a way that we can express our thoughts to God and to others. That's a happy place for me because there's God does something when you put ink on a page and
Mhm.
allows you to think through and try to articulate what He's saying to you and
Right.
what He might be using you to say to other people.
I don't know. I use this all the time. I attribute it to Chuck 'cause I think I saw it in his office, but thoughts disentangle themselves over the lips and through the fingertips. And writing is just such a great way to take these jumbled thoughts. And I think even better than speaking. Speaking, you get it out there, but writing, you have to think about it and back up and erase and, turning it, more into poetry. You have to think of every word and such a great skill. I wish we all had it. To your point, I think there are great writers in them and they can grow their craft, but even a poor writer still needs to be a writer. Like, we're all theologians. We're either good ones or bad ones. I think we're all writers. We need to write.
This is not uh, my quote to claim. It's not original with me, and it's certainly very probably common, but I love this statement. Good writing starts with good listening. In
Mhm.
fact, some say that writing is listening. And I love that because we don't do enough listening. Um, we like to, you can tell I like to talk a lot, and that's all I've been doing for the last hour. But a good writer is very astute at picking things up and being so by listening.
Right.
And the words can be crafted and put to page later. But if you're looking for the details and you're noticing things in people and you're asking questions and stopping to listen, that's where all good writing begins. And maybe there's a way to wrap this up a little. I don't know where else you want to go with this, Todd, but I hope what viewers and listeners are hearing through this conversation of us yakking. I really do hope that there's some thread in this that could be picked out and owned. I hope that there's something in the story that you can claim as your own. And if you're hoping to see God's hand in your life, that you'll trust Him to see His hand. I think in my early days, through my ambition and fear, I was just trying to make a living. We have 4 kids, mortgage, and a dog, you know, car payments. You're just trying to make a living. And nobody's getting rich in Christian radio. And that was never really my motive. But you do have a lot of conversations with God about how you're going to provide living paycheck to paycheck to paycheck. And learning not to focus on that, but learning on being used and trusting Him to guide you in your and you and I have had countless hours about this, Todd, as we both try to find our way in these journeys that both of us have been on and the circuitous route they sometimes take. But you look back, and as I know you have, and you can see God's hand on your life, it's good to memorialize those things,
Right.
thank Him for it, and to trust Him for it, and to remember that all of this is temporary. With Lori being going through her fight, and I will say, she's in a good space right now, but we have no guarantees. We're living in the life in between.
Right.
And so there's all sorts of uncertainty over our futures. But now we've got all this decades of reason to trust in God's faithfulness. That's not a cliche. My
Right.
my hardest moments over the last 2 years, I can say the best part was just feeling that when God said, "I will be with you," He wasn't kidding. There's something that happened, His presence, um, that really came alongside. And I think that a lot of that came with time and experience. And I would hope for anybody listening, whatever you're going through, my journey certainly has been filled with, uncertainty and fear and wondering and uh, feeling alienated and maybe overlooked. But I look back and I often pick up a journal and go read it, and it reminds me He was there during that period.
That's right.
Didn't feel like it, but He was there, and I didn't know the story then.
Oh, this is so good. I have 2 more a smart guy would, hit end right here, but I'm not on radio, I get to go a little bit further, so I'm gonna ask you 2 things that I think are important, and one ties in right here. You've been faithful, and I'm sure there's gotta be plenty of times you wanted to quit, right? Like, Chuck's talked about
Oh,
times
yeah.
where you're ready to walk out, quit being a pastor. I guarantee you've done it. What How do you manage that? You have a for-profit business. You're a businessman, and you have a ministry heart, and you work for ministries. That's gotta get complicated sometimes. Like, how do you have a daily reset? That is there just certain seasons where it's hard to walk that line? Do you compartmentalize well? Like, how do you stay on mission when you're still the ones writing checks, doing the light bills, paying employees, and you're a businessman too? Can you talk a little bit about that journey, and are you better at it now than you used to be, or talk about that a little bit.
Wow, that could send me down a rabbit trail, but I promise I won't. The first thought comes to mind is I have good brothers. I'm speaking about brothers in Christ like you that help me reset from time to time.
Yeah,
Um, I've also learned that a lot of times what feels really dark and ominous on a Friday afternoon when you get an email from somebody who's got a problem you need to solve and it ruins your weekend because you can't stop thinking about it over the weekend. It's a bad time to make any decisions. Get a
right,
good night's sleep, go for a walk,
right,
spend some time getting some distance, praying, reflecting. Don't make any decisions.
yeah,
But, I do have a band of brothers that I go to
mm,
that that can be a sounding board, um, to reset and make sure that I don't lose balance. Obviously, my wife and I talk a lot about this, but I've also learned that it's not fair to her to dump a lot of emotion and churning on her that shouldn't be on her shoulders,
yeah,
any more than she would do that to me. So I've got some good friends that help me with that.
yeah.
But you say, how do you deal with it? Not very well all the time, Todd. not not
Oh,
very well.
well, that's why I'm asking, because it's got to creep in with there's got to be frustration. The life of ministry for people listening who aren't in ministry. Um, Yeah, people think, "Oh, you work for a church, it's great." No, it's horrible. It's horrible. It's not a Disney movie with little birds chirping and landing on your shoulders while you're walking down the hallway. Like, it's full of people, full of messes, and because theology and ministry is mixed in, it makes it even a weirder soup, if you will.
Well, I can say this on behalf of my brothers who are pastors and any woman in that kind of leadership. The church will hurt you. And that's not a statement against the church. It's a reality when you're working with sheep, when you're
Right,
working with people, there will be things that happen where you're disappointed, you will get hurt. Um, and by the way, everything that we do at RK Media is subservient to the church. This ministry that we do is all about the church, and I hang around pastors a lot.
right,
Um, I love coming alongside pastors to encourage them. Spend a lot of time doing that. But
yeah,
there's a lot of pain in that, and there's a lot of pain. I've had a lot of disappointment along the way, and I remember one that happened over 10 years ago that was a real gut punch, when I lost a relationship with one of the people that I represented, and it hurt me deeply. It took me months to kinda get over it, and, that proved to be a turning point. Our company began to grow at that moment and never looked back, and I saw how God used it, seeing things that I didn't foresee that happened that I had no way of understanding. There was a day when I left it behind, said, "Lord, I'm gonna drop this." It was a couple months in, because I
mm,
was churning and working it over in my mind. This is so wrong. This is so wrong. God, what are you doing in this?
right,
And,
right,
it turns out I was spared a lot more pain because, I was set free from that relationship earlier than it
yeah,
actually imploded, and I had no idea it would, but God spared me of that, and he knew the story, I didn't. Things
yeah,
like that happen that part of thread that I've been talking about, the tapestry that's been woven in my life.
Yeah. I it's really interesting. As I get older, I see the joy in things that used to frustrate me, and that's wrestling, constant wrestling. And I realize that God does that with our lives. He lets us wrestle. He wants us to wrestle because if you give an easy answer, that's not you're over it. But when you're constantly have to wrestle and balance life, balance your ministry with your work, that's good. That healthy, it's sort of like balancing on a wire. You're constantly doing this, and that's what keeps you balanced is the struggle. If it was easy, it wouldn't be a big deal walking across the wire. And so that's what I'm hearing in your answer. I'm going to ask for 3 or 4 more minutes because I can't get off this call without people knowing your story with Pilgrim Progress. And you didn't mention it in there, but I want to hear the quick takeaway. Then I want to ask you about your collection because I'm fascinated by this. I think others would be too.
Well, I earlier described what happened to me in 1966 and at Wagon Train Camp at Hume Lake Christian Conference Center um, in Central California. I was part of this camp, and they had a theme that week of Pilgrim's Progress, which was very clever, and they played it out, sussed it out through the week, and then on Friday night, it all culminated in a call around the fire pit, and I I came to Christ that night, and it was, as I said, a very very meaningful experience, very genuine, authentic, clear-minded decision. And my brother, who was 2 years older, uh, had already made that decision, and so he reveled in what I did. It was a great moment, but that story stuck with me, and throughout my life, that theme has continued. And then I got a little older in life, I discovered that you can get copies of Pilgrim's Progress. I believe it's in the public domain, so there's no copyright issues, and it's easy to go on to eBay and find 100-year-old copy of it, leather bound with big art plates in it.
Mhm.
So I started buying them and collecting them, giving them away as gifts, and I probably got about 20 of them at home, many of them 75, 100 years old. They're not terribly expensive. It's not Don't be impressed. It's just a thing. I was looking at one this morning before I left the house, and, yeah, I just that theme has reoccurred to me, and I have, um I will tell you that, my daughter gave me one of these, gifts a couple years ago. It's called Storyworth, and it's a unique gift. Basically, it is an invitation for somebody to write their life story in a memoir, and you spend a year answering, weekly questions and writing about them, and then at the end of the year, the company publishes it in a hardbound book. Um, so I did that, and, it's a hard gift to receive because that's a lot of work, and
I,
fortunately, it came during COVID, so I had some time to do it. Saturday mornings, I was often pounding away at my laptop writing this, basically a memoir that only my family will ever have. It's never gonna be published, but one of the chapters that I wrote, which quite meaningful for me, I want my family to know and generations of my family to know how it happened, at that camp and the threads of that story that have been woven through my life.
how often do you read Pilgrim's Progress? Periodically or a lot?
You know, I'm not gonna say it's once a year, but,
Mhm.
there's several different versions of it, thankfully, because the original version is kinda tough to read.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
there's several contemporary versions. I've got one in my cabinet right now, so just pulling this down of a particular version of it. There's a children's version, um, and I recommend it to any family to let your kids enjoy that allegory.
Do you, last question, is there a white whale version that you're looking for? Like, is there original copy? Is there a signed copy? Is there a version that you go to eBay and, man, if you ever see it, you're gonna go grab it?
Oh, yeah, and I don't know the name of it. I will tell you that, I have, been to several high-end, book collection stores. There's one in Palm Beach, Florida, that's just unbelievable, leather bound, but these books are 15,000, 25,000. dollars, and I'd feel nervous with a book like that. But there's something about holding something in your hands that's been around a long time. And you think, I wonder how many people have read this and
Right.
had an experience with this. That's pretty beautiful.
Yeah.
Not
I
the
love
Bible, but it's close.
it. No, no, well, that's all it's talking about, that's right. Roger, thanks for taking the time, part of the reason I asked you to do this part is because the thing I want people to take away with really all the stories is that God's doing something great in people's lives. He normally w prepares them for that ministry, and that's what we were gathering in your story. But I want people to know that, there's people who, like you, behind the scenes, that you've done such a great job with that make things happen, and not everybody would know you exist, right? And after this, though, we're like, "Wow, you've been really." I would call you a pillar of the Christian media, world. You've been doing it for decades, and so many ministries rely on you, and I just wanted that to encourage people that God can put you somewhere to do great things, and nobody may ever know who you are, but you just be faithful to it. You've done a really great job with that, Roger. More
Thank you. And I certainly hope that those who have been listening to us again hear God's voice and find their story that He's writing into their lives to do something for Him. And it doesn't mean you have to be behind a microphone or have the limelight. We all have something to do, thank goodness, and there's a lot of fulfillment in doing what God wants us to do.
amen to that. All right, brother. Thank you very much for your time.
Absolutely. Take care, Todd.